Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 148. It is not the future that you're afraid of. It's repeating the past that makes you anxious. Beans Morocco.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my indie film hustlers, to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is sponsored by Hollywood Camera Work. If you guys are interested in learning how to direct actors and become a actor's director, Hollywood Camera Work has developed an amazing master course called Directing Actors. And it is almost 30 hours. And I've taken this course, and it is by far the most comprehensive directing actors course I have ever seen. So if you want to get access to this course, head over to hollywoodcamerawork.com and use the coupon code HUSTLE to get 30% off. That's hollywoodcamerawork.com and use the coupon code HUSTLE. Now, guys, I don't know if you know this or not. I'm sure anybody who's been at the site in the last 6 months have seen this, but I just wanted guys to bring it up to you again. We have a link to over 120 screenplays, and many of them are the 2017 Oscar hopefuls and also Oscar winner and many other ones. But the links to download will go away as the studios pull them out. So if you guys want to download these for free and legally, head over to indiefilmhustle.com/2017 screenplays and download to your heart's content, because you can learn a lot from reading amazing screenplays. Now, I've been reached out by a bunch of the tribe members after I posted that picture of me on that spaceship set and saying that I have a new project going on. I can't talk about it completely yet. We're really close to start shooting it. As soon as we start shooting it, I will let you guys know what is going on. It is a job, not a feature film or anything like that, but it is a job that I'm directing. Super fun job. And I'll give you updates about what I'm doing in the coming weeks. And also, I've been blessed, man, to be working on an insane TV show on Hulu that's going to be coming out April 4th called Dimension 404 from the Rocket Jump boys and team. And I've had nothing but a ball working with these guys over the last probably 4 or 5 months, if not longer, I think, doing all the post-production as far as the color grading, online editorial, and deliverables for the project. And it is awesome. If you guys don't know who Rocket Jump is, just go to YouTube and type in the word Rocket Jump, and you'll get your mind blown. They are some of the OGs of YouTube. They got about 8 million followers, and they have a huge audience. They've done a few shows for Hulu, and this is their biggest show to date. And I can't tell you any more about it yet, but it is super, super cool. I cannot wait to tell you guys about it. I'll be showing you guys a trailer. I saw the trailer for it, and it's awesome. So if you guys like 80s kind of anthology series, you will love this show. It's going to be on Hulu on April 4th, 404, obviously. And I'm working on getting Des Dolly, who's one of the founders of Rocket Jump, on the show. We're going to be doing hopefully a huge cross promotion between Rocket Jump and Indie Film Hustle. And I wanted to kind of dig in and deeply about how these guys were able to build such an amazing audience, such a large audience, and get into the nitty-gritty of how you build an online empire. Because my God, these guys have built an online empire, and I want to share as much of that information as I can with you guys. So keep an eye out for that in the next coming months as well. Now, today I have a special treat for you guys. We've got the writer and creator of BeetleJuice, Larry Wilson. I mean, I don't know if you guys have, if some of you guys haven't seen BeetleJuice, for God's sakes, go out and see BeetleJuice. He also wrote Addams Family. He also worked on multiple episodes of the classic legendary show Tales from the Crypt. So he has a genre that he really likes, which is the supernatural and somewhat horror aspects, but more supernatural stuff like BeetleJuice and the Addams Family. And I talking to Larry was not only a screenwriter, but he was also a studio executive. And in the interview, he tells a story of how he actually fought for James Cameron to get the Aliens job. That Terminator had not even been released yet, and he was working with Walter Hill at Walter Hill's office, and they were bringing him in to do the sequel for Alien, which was obviously Aliens, and that people did not they didn't really believe that James could do it, but Larry fought for him. And among other amazing stories, Larry has been around the business for a long time, has worked with everybody under the sun, and it was such a pleasure having him on the show. I learned a ton of stuff from him. He tells great stories, and just the BeetleJuice story of how Tim Burton and him got together is insane, and how that whole project got off the ground and development hell and all this kind of stuff. Because if you guys know BeetleJuice, can you imagine trying to get a movie like BeetleJuice produced by a studio today? I mean, it's just unheard of. So even back then, BeetleJuice was such a unique situation that the studio really had no idea what to do with it or how to make it. But it got made, and boy, was it ever a launching pad for both Larry and for a little guy named Tim Burton. But anyway, without any further ado, I want you guys to enjoy my very spooky and enjoyable conversation with screenwriter Larry Wilson. I'd like to welcome to the show Larry Wilson, man. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, you're welcome, Alex. Thanks for having me.
I'm a huge fan of your work. I'm a 90s guy. So,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of the work you did, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, is I was in my video store days too during that time. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
I think I sent you a picture. Didn't I send you a picture of my,
Yes, you did.
I did.
Great. Yeah,
I just happened to be going through it and I saw it and I was like, this is just too perfect. And I was standing right next to a standee from Addams Family. So I thought it was really
I had one of those in my basement until it burned up in a house fire. Actually, I had one of those standees. Yeah.
I wish I still had some of those standees, tell you the truth. So anyway, I wanted to first ask you, what made you want to get into the very easy and profitable world of writing?
Wow. Okay.
There's some sarcasm in that question.
Yes. Thank you. There should be. I came to Hollywood not knowing. I was a terrible student. High school student, but I had a passion, very unspecific, if that's a word, a passion for films, and wanted to do something. And I took a standalone, this was like a million years ago too, Alex. I mean, I took a standalone screenwriting class at the time I was being taught at Stella Adler. Mm-hmm. And the instructor, whose name sadly I'm going to forget, actually saw some first pages and said, you could be good at this. And it just, it lit a fire. And I just told myself I'm going to be a screenwriter. And I started writing. It was back before there were a lot of resources as there are now. About how that works, all of that. I got a hold of a couple of scripts and tried to mimic them, and I just kept at it until I suffered a severe case of writer's block. I sort of had a golden door out of writing, which was I was a studio executive or I was a script reader and about to become, or had a chance to become, a studio executive at Paramount under Jeff Katzenberg and Michael Eisner, and I did that, and I was doing it pretty well, I think. But I really missed writing, and I was really having qualms about the notes I was giving writers, and we were sort of the iron fist and the velvet glove studio at that point. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then I went back. I finally made a decision. I'll cut the history lesson short to jump back into writing. And the first thing I co-wrote with my partner, Michael McDowell, was BeetleJuice.
Now, how did BeetleJuice come to life? Because that is a very unique story.
It's so funny because the first stage of it was so just really over a weekend. I had a producing partner too. It's both the late Michael McDowell, sadly, both of these was my writing partner, and the late Michael Bender was my producing partner. And the three of us were just talking about what we wanted to do together. We decided to have this partnership, and I said psychedelic ghost comedy. I didn't know quite what that meant.
It's a very loose term for sure.
Yeah, you think? Yeah. But it sounded good, right?
Sure, I'd watch that.
It sounded interesting. And Michael was living Michael McDowell, my writing partner, was living in Boston at that time. And he called me, he said, okay, here's what it is. It's the ghost haunting the humans.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
And that was like the first thing that we just went, wow, okay, that's cool. And what I came back with after Michael said, it's the ghost, or the humans haunting the ghosts, humans haunting the ghosts. And I said, oh, that's great. I love that. And Michael and I had kind of a funny relationship, just in the sense that he was very well educated. I want to say Harvard. It may have been another prestigious university. Right. A very sort of sophisticated man, shall we say. And I had grown up, a surfer, a borderline high school dropout. and so we sort of had this, it was always in good fun, but kind of this class war thing going on. And I said, okay, Michael, it's the humans haunting the ghosts, and I'm the ghost, and the humans are you. And so that was part 2 of it. And then part 3 was, and this again was over just a few calls over a weekend. We said, well, the humans are just too, or the ghosts are too nice. They don't know how to get the humans out of the house. So they need to hire a gunfighter. And that gunfighter, of course, became BeetleJuice. And it was that the premise was locked down over like a weekend of maybe 3-4 phone calls. And that was, that was the start of it. Then, of course, all we had to do was write the script.
Right. That's that little part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Now, so I'm assuming you went to pitch this. I mean, and this was the 80s, so it's a different time.
No, you know what? We decided Michael and I wanted to learn to write together. Michael McDowell was an incredibly professional writer. And even though I had been a studio executive at that point for several years, and I was also head of development for the great director Walter Hill's company, like I said, I had sort of given up on screenwriting, or maybe I didn't say this, but I had a real case of writer's block. There's no doubt about it. And Michael helped me break through that. But we decided to write the script on spec. And so we never even thought about pitching it. And Michael was a writer's writer. And the idea of going in and pitching an idea at that point was kind of an anathema to him. And so we wrote the script. And if you want to, if I can share a kind of a funny,
please
about that, Alex, I've learned. I hope you and the audience doesn't mind this. I've sort of learned not to name names. It comes back to haunt you.
You're not the first guest to kind of dance around certain names, but they like to tell stories.
And I'm going to dance around this one, but all I'm going to say, what I'll say is, I took the script to a very prominent studio executive and asked him to read it because he liked my work as an executive. And he said yes, and he took it and he read it over. When the first draft was finished, I gave it to him, and he read that over a weekend. And I actually got summoned to his office on Monday. That's his first draft of BeetleJuice, obviously. And I thought, wow, he's calling me into the office already. He's read it. I'm fantasizing he's going to love it and all that. And he literally called me into his office to say, what are you doing with your life? What are you doing with your career? This thing is so weird. It is so out of touch with any kind of that I can imagine. He said, you have a very good future, studio executive. Why are you just going to blow that with this piece of shit? And oh my God, you can imagine. I was like, I was pretty devastated, but there's an unsung hero in all of this. You mentioned when we were talking right before we started here, I taught at UCLA Extension for over 25 years, and I had a student named Marjorie Lewis who had a very sort of low-level development job at the Geffen Company. And she was sort of the smartest young woman in my class at that time, and I'd given it to her to read over that same weekend because I just was curious what she'd say. And after having been just completely derailed by this conversation with the studio executive, and then he asked me what we thought we were going to ask for the studio executive, what we were going to ask for, in terms of a selling price, and I think I said like $100,000, and he just laughed. I mean, but I called Marjorie and I said, "Did you read it?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Did you like it?" She said, "Like it, I'm going to get the Geffen Company to buy it." And knowing Marjorie, she just kept pounding people to read it. So the idea came quickly. The first draft came pretty quickly with Michael and I, and we put no limits on ourselves. We had no thoughts about a demographic.
Yes.
I suppose it's the only PG-rated movie with an F-bomb in it.
Right.
And then we sold it to the Geffen Company.
Now, yeah, because you could anyone who's seen Beetlejuice, you can tell there is no demographic involved at all in the storytelling whatsoever. But now, when did Tim Burton come into play? Because Beetlejuice is so. I know you guys came up with the story, but I guess the way it was directed and brought to the screen, it is so Tim Burton in his aesthetic. How was it collaborating with a kind of young and pretty raw Tim Burton? He had only done Pee-wee's Big Adventure at that point, so he was still very unproven.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's pretty common knowledge that there was a bit of a battle between Tim and Paul Rubens' Pee-wee about whose movie it really was, whose sensibility it really was. So Tim Burton was not the Tim Burton at that point.
Pee-wee is not a Tim Burton-esque film at all. You can tell it's not. You can see a little bit of it in there, but not really.
Yeah. So as you said, Tim was, still somewhat unproven. He was, as we all know, a very idiosyncratic person, and he frightened a lot of studio executives, I think, still.
He still frightens them.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, which I love about him, actually. Yeah. But so Michael McDowell and I wrote. We got to know Tim because he. Alex, I'm trying to remember how he got his hands on the first draft of Beetlejuice, but he did, and he asked Michael and I to write the Alfred Hitchcock television anthology show. Sure. This is a bit of 80s history you might remember. They colorized some of Hitchcock's openings to the show, and then we wrote, many writers wrote new episodes for the anthology, but based on the Alfred Hitchcock introductions. And Michael and I did one of those for Tim. It was the first time we worked together, called The Jar, which is available on YouTube if any Tim Burton historians want to dig into that. And that kind of cemented the relationship. And Tim told us, he said, "I love Beetlejuice. I would love to direct it, but I've got another project." That other project, there's a long development hell story that can go with this, but that other project finally fell through at a time when we really needed someone like Tim to step up and rescue the script from what a very grueling and very counterproductive development hell.
I was gonna ask you about studio notes specifically with this, because it seems like it is as far from a studio movie as I've ever seen. How crazy was the notes? Because I can imagine people, in the studio system just could not wrap their head around it.
Well, I'll tell you again without
naming names.
And this was not David Geffen himself. When David Geffen became involved, why you say it's unlike almost any studio movie you can imagine, it was because he ran interference for us, and of course did it with all his clout and all his brilliance. But Michael McDowell and I felt that we spent a year ruining the script. That all of that, it has so many, if it made Michael and I laugh, or if it felt right, it went into the script. And there's references to psychedelic music. There's references to Mexican horror movies. There's references to Tom and Jerry cartoons. I mean, it's just full of all this weirdness. It didn't feel weird to us. But we got into one of those situations with a development executive who just tried to flatten everything that was quirky, idiosyncratic out of it. And we were pretty much at the point feeling like we had ruined the script when, thankfully, and again, it's kind of a long, complex story, but when we were managed to say to Tim, and Tim's other project had fallen through.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Would you want to step up and direct it? And Tim said yes, but he essentially said, I want to do it if I can go back to what the first draft was. So we caught this huge break, as you can imagine, and Tim at that point, he wasn't the Tim Burton yet, and Michael and I built the rocket and put it on the launching pad, but Tim launched it to the moon, and of course his sensibility, it's all there, and it was just this very, it was one of those unique, and the thing about Tim and me at that point was the things that we shared together were like the drive-in movies we'd gone to see, the Vincent Price movies, and like Corman movies, and just all this kind of what was kind of at that point, as you'll remember, like the kind of like this trash sensibility, and Tim very brilliantly said that we were the acceptable edge of the unacceptable. It's a great
line.
It is, right? Yeah, I've always thought about that, and I've tried to sort of live by that code. Maybe sometimes to my my commercial demise. That Tim became involved, and it kind of went back to what the first draft had been, and then his sensibility, and it gelled into what BeetleJuice is.
And for people who, we have a lot of younger audience members listening to this. If you guys haven't seen BeetleJuice, you got to go watch BeetleJuice. It is a triumph, a creative triumph without question. But a lot of people forget it was a pretty monster hit. When it came out,
it was, and please, if you haven't seen it,
it's everywhere.
Copies, and that was another thing, that there were people at Warner Brothers, marketing executives particularly, who hated the movie. Oh my God, they hated the movie. And there was a movement within that those people to change the title to House Ghost. That would,
oh my God,
and just kind of dump it the way that
studios do,
the film, because they thought it was they just didn't get it, and that the first weekend it came out, which was actually really cool, because the Winona Ryder character Lydia, which
she's so great.
Yeah, it's become like this iconic goth girl character, and that one, the initial vision of her, I will take credit for, because I had gone to hear another 80s reference. I'd gone to see the band The Cure.
Yeah, you read my mind. I'm like, he's going to say The Cure, isn't he?
Yeah, I'd gone to see him at the Rose Bowl, and I thought, and it felt like, in a way, I was in an audience of like 50,000 teenage girls dressed in black,
Right.
So you cut to the opening weekend of the movie, and I went the first night to see it, and the audience was coming out. Some people loving it, some people hating it, which I actually thought was really good, because we had wanted to write something that was a definitive statement, not something that would please everyone, and that was certainly Tim's goal too.
Yes.
So then I went back on Saturday night to see it again, and I saw all these girls, like these teenage girls, who had obviously seen it the first night, gone into their closets the second night, and come back dressed like Lydia Dietz, the Winona Ryder character. And that's when I knew, okay, this thing is going to take off. And it did, and it was a huge, surpassed everyone's expectations.
Oh, and then some.
And continues to do so. It's amazing to me that it's become this pop cult classic that it's become, but it has.
I remember. I went to the theater to see it. and when I was in high school, and it blew my mind because you'd never seen anything like that before, and I think that pretty much announced who Tim Burton was really quickly, and it announced Tim in a huge way, and then obviously right afterwards he got that little movie called Batman. That little thing that went out, but I'm always fascinated about how studios, you always hear these horror stories of studio execs or just, development executives always trying to get in the middle of ruining something. And I've heard other options too, that they actually do help sometimes. But with something like this, it's just so outside the box. That's why I was amazed. And I guess, I don't know if a movie like this could get made I don't think it would get made in today's studio system unless you had a big gun like a Tim Burton or someone behind it. But in the 80s, it was a little bit more Wild Wild West. Do you agree?
Yeah, it was, and I don't want, because I've been a studio executive, I don't want to. It's so easy to use that brush, to paint them all that they're always in the way and they're always messing up your project and all of that, and it's not necessarily true. And we had, we did have fans and within Warner Brothers and people who did get the movie, but there was but the main thing we had was David Geffen on our side, and
a champion.
Yeah, as the champion of it. And there's one more funny story that I'll tell if it isn't going on too long.
Sure.
But so after this weekend where the film just exceeded everyone's expectations, there was like a marketing meeting. That we were invited to.
Right.
And one of these marketing executives who had been so passionately hated the film was having to confront these weekend grosses. And he said, well, at least we got the little girls in black to come in, or some line like that. And
right.
When we walked out of the meeting, Tim said, well, who did he think we made it for? It was, so it was a film that divided everyone in the beginning, and now everyone, including myself, will take credit for it being, this pop classic.
Now, Tim obviously got Batman afterwards, but you also got another great gig right afterwards, which is Addams Family.
Yes, yeah.
How was it? Bringing such a classic TV show to life, because it's still being done today. For God's sakes, we got Chips coming out for some godforsaken reason, but this whole turning TV shows into. I think it started in the late '80s, early '90s is when this kind of pattern started happening. Correct? Yeah,
and I got involved in the Addams Family and wrote with my great partner and friend Caroline Thompson. It was Scott Rudin who brought us together, and Caroline and I sort of had this writer's blind date for those of you who aren't in LA, there's a very famous drive-through restaurant called Bob's Big Boy, and
sure.
Caroline and I met there and had a hamburger and decided we could work together and work on the Addams Family together. And we were brought together by Scott Rudin, and the thing that people always remember the TV show as the origin, but the actual origin were these
comics,
brilliant New Yorker cartoons by Charles Addams, and that sort of animated our sensibility of it, or brought we of course we referred to the TV show. And borrowed characters from it, particularly Thing, the Hand.
Oh, that's great.
But it was really the Charles Addams New Yorker cartoons aesthetic that we really tried to emulate. And I'm sure there was another at that point. Taking a TV show and rewriting it into a film, but we were definitely one of the first and started that trend, for better or for worse. I don't know. Yeah.
I can't. I'm sure there are good TV shows there are, but I just can't remember. Like Charlie's Angels, I guess the first one was a lot of fun. But anyway, we can go on and on. But Addams Family, actually, I really enjoyed Addams Family. It was a monster hit too. It was another grand slam when it came out.
It was a huge hit.
And it was was that Barry Sonnenfeld's first directorial movie?
Yes, it was, and he had been the cinematographer for the Coen brothers, and it was his first a feature directing gig, and again, there were a couple of executive suits who were very suspicious of him stepping up and doing it. But of course,
he's done okay with himself. The Men in Blacks and so on.
And again, it was someone who had a brilliant sort of idiosyncratic vision and took what we had done and brought it to life in just an incredible way.
No, real quick, I forgot to ask one question about BeetleJuice.
Yeah, sure.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. Is it BeetleJuice or BeetleGuice? Why? What's the difference? Because I know,
as I remember that day, the BeetleGuice being the constellation, and it was Michael McDowell who came up with the pun. I don't know if it's a pun exactly, but the idea of that we would take BeetleGuice but pronounce it BeetleJuice, and then we changed it to BeetleJuice as like the juice of a beetle, which was another thing that a lot of people hated was
the name. But in the actual movie, the title is BeetleGuice, if I'm not mistaken, and not Beetle. It might have changed.
No, the title is BeetleJuice, Guice.
Yeah,
there were some BeetleGuice references, or very early on at some point. I don't remember exactly, but thank God it wasn't called House Ghost. That's
at the end of the day, we're all grateful for not being called House Ghost. Now, do you have any advice from and this actually is a good question because you're on both sides of the fence here. Any advice on how to deal with studio or producer's notes as a writer?
Yeah, it is. Well, yes, I do, and I'm just taking a breath here because I want to say this succinctly because it's a subject I could go on about.
All right.
There's a dance involved in it. There's no doubt about it. If you are that young writer out there who sells his or her first script to a studio, be prepared to write many drafts, get a lot of notes, and deal with it accordingly. And accordingly to me means you need to be respectful of the process, or don't sell them the script. Become a DIY director, which is of course
doable now.
You're doing, I mean, if it's just your vision or no vision, do it yourself. Which was not an option, particularly in the 80s, in the way that it is now. But there's a dance involved in working with studio executives, and you do need to think a little bit about. Well, first of all, you have to be open, and don't assume that someone, an executive, won't have anything smart to say or good to say to you, and don't take all of these studio executive horror stories so seriously that you aren't willing to listen. And often you will get notes that will make your script better. But you do also have to have kind of an internal courage and a resolve that there are things that you will say no to. And you can say no respectfully. You can say it in the context of realizing that you're working with a team of people who are hopefully trying to make the best movie or TV show possible. But you have to know what you can. Well, you have to be open to listening, and maybe there's a better idea. It's a collaborative medium, to use that horrible cliche phrase. But within that dance, you also have to have things that you just absolutely say no. That so destroys the vision, that so destroys the essence of what we're trying to do, that we can't go there. And it's not for the faint of heart, is it, Alex?
No, it's not.
Yeah, and I say this after decades of experience, but doing this. I've got a new animated film coming out October this year, Halloween 2017. It's an animated version of The Little Vampire, which
very cool.
The action version.
Yeah.
And that, my producing partner and writing partner, Richard Klaus, we go back and forth. Sometimes it feels endlessly on scenes. But at the end of the day, I know he has the best interest of the film at heart, and I do too. But there's things he's said to me, absolutely no, this isn't what we're doing. And there's things I've said to him. And then there are things where you say, okay, no, you have a better idea, or let's try it at least. Mm-hmm. And you gotta have some, if you're going to play that studio game, and I don't want to, game is too light of a term for it. If you're going to make your movie through a conventional movie studio process, you got to be willing to play that. We'll call it a game or call it a dance. You got to be willing to play the game or do the dance. And do it intelligently. And again, it's being open to good notes, but then having the sort of the intestinal fortitude, the guts to say, no, I can't do that. It doesn't work.
Right. Until you become James Cameron, then you just tell him, no, it's not going to happen. And this is going to happen this way.
And it's so funny because if you look at like Caroline Thompson, my Addams Family writing partner, has written so many brilliant films. From Edward Scissorhands, I just watched The Corpse Bride again last night, a couple nights ago. Yeah. I could go on and on with her credits, but she says sometimes if we ever think about collaborating together, she'll say, "Don't you think at this point we should be able to walk into one of these executives' offices and say, here's our resume, here's what we've done. Can you please just let us do it and leave us alone?"
Right.
But it's just a joke because it never happens that way. If you're working for a studio, you're going to get notes. You're going to be in that playing that game or doing that dance.
But can you? I'm trying to think of a writer who has that kind of power. There's very few. I mean, Tarantino, obviously, but he's a director. But who, as a writer and just a writer, not a director, has that kind of power? Because there are directors who do have that power. There's very few, but there are that can kind of do what they want, depending on the budget, of course, but like Woody Allen does what he wants when he wants. But he also keeps the budgets at a very low, let's say the Coen brothers, another group these guys just literally do whatever they want. And I don't think they get a lot of studio notes, but are there any writers, do you think? I mean, there's obviously some very monster writers out there who are, at the upper echelon, if you will, of writing, but do they have that kind of power anymore? Is there anyone like that?
I mean, wow, that would be a list of what, like 2-3 people. I mean,
right, exactly. It's a very small list.
I consider myself, depending on the arc of my career, I guess A list down to A- list. So, I am well respected at this point, and people will listen to me.
But when Steven,
there's that A+ list that maybe Aaron Sorkin, but they're going to be answerable to a director. I mean,
right?
If you want to do it yourself, you got really do it, and it's your vision and all of that. Because the names that you listed, the Coen brothers, Tarantino, of course, they're brilliant directors, and they have both those things going.
Right.
Screenwriters, not so much.
Right. And that's the cliche of like, oh, the screenwriters never get the respect that they deserve, because I mean, without the word, there's nothing. Yeah.
And that's another one of those things that's a truth that can be untrue. I sometimes, cause I'm heading into, oh my God, I'm knocking wood here, Alex. I mean, like a 30-year run of great years, not so good years, pretty good years, blah, blah, blah. But, I've made my living as a writer now for over 30 years, which is like kind of insane, actually.
It really is a miracle, honestly.
Yeah, it's and I'm very aware of it, and to have a new film coming out this year it's like a really brilliant thing. But it's like I was saying with Caroline, can I walk in a room and say, this is what I want to do, and this is how I'm going to do it, and look at, if you want everyone wants the new BeetleJuice until you think you've given it to them, then they get scared. I mean, in studios, And screenwriting, you're not going to be with maybe we could come up with a list of 3 people, 4 people.
But even then, you're right.
You're not going to be that where it's you and everyone. You're not going to be. They don't celebrate the screenwriters too much, do they?
Not really. And even those guys that are on that list, you're right. They do have to answer to a director eventually.
Yeah.
And unless they're both the same person, the screenwriter is. I mean, there are some that have a little bit more clout and obviously a little bit more muscle, but even then, at the end of the day, it all depends. And if they're working at the high level of budget. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. Generally speaking, the director that they bring on is going to probably be at that high level as well. That's why I wonder, like, I always tell people, like, I have such a great respect for James Cameron because he really is probably the only guy on the planet who could have done Avatar the way he did it. Like, not even, I mean, Spielberg was, hat in hand for Lincoln for years. I'm like, it's Steven freaking Spielberg.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Like, and Martin Scorsese was trying to get silence done for 20 years. Like, he's Martin Scorsese, so, so it really is, it's a very small crowd that can kind of work in the studio. So, I mean, Chris Nolan right now is probably one of those guys who could pretty much, even David Fincher can't. And he's David freaking Fincher. Yeah. I had Jim Ools on, and we were talking about Fight Club and the battles that they had with Fight Club and all that stuff. Not him and Fincher, but the studios. A very similar thing.
I can imagine.
They just didn't get it. Like, same thing with Beetlejuice. They just didn't get it. And it's now become a masterpiece. It's considered a masterpiece. Yeah, exactly. So you also worked a bit on TV with Tales in the Crypt. How does your work differ when you're writing for television versus writing for feature films?
Well, Tales from the Crypt, which I understand is being revived, was like just one of the great anthology shows of all times. I feel very blessed. I wrote 6 episodes. I wrote and directed an episode. It was my first directing gig that I'm still remain really proud of. And it was like just one of the best run shows imaginable. It was, and the showrunner's name was Gil Adler, and I got to know Gil personally after the Crypt was kind of winding down, and he was 2 different people. He could be he was a very nice man, actually. I'm sure still is a very nice man. I haven't seen him in a while. Offset, but on set and during the making of that show, he could be really intimidating if he chose to be. And I always considered it, it spoke well of me that I got invited back every season of the show to do an episode. But the thing about it was, I mean, I'll just start right at the beginning. The scripts had to be 21 pages. They could not be 22 pages. They could not be 20 pages. They had to be 21 pages. So you had to really learn to write that succinctly. And if I did, my sin probably every season was that my first draft would be, too long by a couple of pages. And I would say to Gil, well, can I have an extra page? And I'd always be no, 21 pages. Which is like, and this whole flash story movement that you may be aware of, where you write like 100-word story and or a 1,500-word story. I love that, and it's.
Can you tell me a little bit more? I don't know about that. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
There's a literary movement out there, I guess you'd call it, called flash writing, and it's the idea of writing a short story with a very specific number of words that you have to tell your story. I came across this. There's a horror writer named David Lake who published an anthology book of 100-word stories. Mm-hmm. And I read a few of them and I went, wow, this is so cool. It's because it's such a great piece of discipline. And then I started to explore it, and it's actually like it's like a literary movement, And I mean, and there's Twitter stories where you have to write a story with I forget how many characters you have with your Twitter feed.
140 characters.
Yeah, there's a 100-word story, there's a 1,500-word story, and it's just the idea: how much can you convey, and how good of a story can you tell with this within this very limited frame of just a certain number of words. And I sat down after reading a few of the 100-word stories and wrote my own 100-word horde story. And I went, oh, wow, it actually, because it was, it was probably like 150 words when I finished the first draft, and then, cut it out. And I kept cutting until it was exactly 100 words. And it was amazing to see, and I'm sure you can relate to this as a filmmaker, about how much you can cut and how many things that may seem precious to you, they cut them away and you can still convey the essence of the story. And that was very true on Tales from the Crypt. Like I said, we had 21 pages to tell a story, and everyone was a miniature movie. There were no repeating characters. There was no, everyone was very different from the next, and it was an incredible bit of writing discipline for me. It was incredible to have to tell the best story possible, and within that limited frame of I guess that would be 21 minutes, 20,
give or take, right?
And that was I've never done a series television. Because I think too much beginning, middles, and ends. That's not a bad thing, but that's the way my brain works. But I guarantee that one of the disciplines of TV, even in this this great era we're in now, of where you can do like the Breaking Bad 4-season story arc and all that, but the essence is still economy, I think, in television.
It's a great discipline, that concept of flash writing. It's a great discipline for writers. Any writers listening out there, try to do that, because it's wonderful.
Alex, it is. And it's something that I just really came across a very short time ago. And I love it. And I know we're going to get around to talking about some of the workshops and stuff I'm doing. But it's something I'm going to utilize within those workshops, because I just think it's an incredible it's like the perfect discipline for a screenwriter who's taking a day off from screenwriting but still wants to get their their writing muscles exercised that day. This idea of a 100-word short story, because it's a very cinematic way to tell a story. You have to do it with very key images and just those moments that really can convey what you try to convey.
I mean, it's basically a workout for your writing muscle. It really is, because you have to do it within this framework, and it's a great discipline to carry on with all your writing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get because sometimes writing gets away from you.
Yes, it does. Yeah, and my first drafts are always overlong,
right?
And then they go into the digital drawer now for a while, and I go back to them. And I always realize that in your first draft, a lot of why they're, my drafts are probably like 20 pages too long, is I'm still explaining the story to myself,
right.
within that draft, and then you'll cut things away that you will think, oh, I can't lose that, but then you lose it, and most often you don't miss it. And of course, if that's the miracle of the computer. You can cut it, then you can undo the cut and put it back. But
I know
I like to be relentless with my first draft after I've written it and put it away for a few weeks and just cut it to death and see where it stands.
Now, and you're talking about Tales from the Crypt. They're actually bringing back Amazing Stories. Did you hear that?
Oh no, I hadn't heard about that one. I forget who it is who's bringing Tales from the Crypt back. I should probably go knock on their door. But,
you should. You absolutely should.
Yeah.
But Amazing Stories was one of those shows from the 80s too. I mean, I think there's a lot of anthology. Anthology is starting to be a little bit in vogue now, and they're starting to bring them all back.
I'm so glad.
They're great.
Yeah, and it's the right show and a show that was run as well as the Tales from the Crypt was run. It was a chance to write a movie in miniature, and also be, I always said, it was my chance to be sort of like a, if I had a heavy metal aesthetic in me, that was the Crypt. I could be dark and disturbing and spew a lot of venom, which is awesome.
You get to play in a place that you might not want to invest an entire feature film or try to get a feature film off the ground. But for a 21-minute piece, I really have always wanted to play with this idea. So let me just throw it into this short, and it's basically a short. And I think in today's world, that's why anthologies are starting to come back, because the attention span for a lot of younger generation it works as an anthology as opposed to the longer formats as well. But I was going to ask you something. Yeah. What are your tips? Do you have any tips that you can share about writing horror and fantasy, since you've done it so often in your life?
Yeah, I think so. The big tip about it is, look, horror particularly, but we all now can go to a multiplex fantasy movie or a multiplex comic book movie, which is essentially, it's a fantasy movie.
Mm-hmm. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
And you see the trailers preceding the movie, and they all bleed into where they feel like it's the same movie. Like you see 6 versions of the same movie in the trailers, and then you see the movie, and it's the same movie. Mm-hmm. So but horror particularly, it runs in cycles. Someone will do something like Paranormal Activities, that is sort of this groundbreaking film in terms of how it was shot, the budget it was shot on, and all of that. Mm-hmm. And then it will be emulated, ripped off, and beaten to death.
Yes.
And so how do you be original within the context of genre? Are in a sense, they are based on repetition. There's only so many ways to scare people.
Right.
And the thing that I try to teach people and say to people about it is, you need to be personal. You need to really, I think, to really be scary, you need to go inside yourself and find that piece of darkness that. And I don't consider myself a dark person by any means. I consider horror a nice place to visit. I wouldn't want to live there, in my life, obviously. But you got to kind of go inside and find that thing that just scares you to death, and start there. And that's where you're going to find a voice, and that's where you're going to find originality. By taking a genre that too often, again, whatever the horror movie du jour is, it will be ripped off endlessly in usually a rapidly declining way. But if you can be personal, and if you can just really, really look inside yourself and say, what's my darkest impulse, or what is the thing that scares me to death, and start there. Then you have something to build on, and then you have something that has a chance of having some originality.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And
just quickly to go back to Tales from the Crypt, they were all based on these 1950s horror comic stories. You kind of took the premise of the story, then wrote something new around it. But I can look at all of my episodes now, and without going into, the family psychodrama or any of that, I can see exactly where they came from and feel myself within them, even though they were based on another story and a comic book story. And of course, it was an anthology of, I forget how many episodes per season, but I can look at all of those episodes and see some of my worst fears and some of my darkest impulses, I guess you'd say, within those stories. And I'm proud of that.
Now, can you, and I think this is a really important point to kind of stress to the audience, can you agree with me that all good art, and specifically art in the scope that we're talking about, which is filmmaking and screenwriting, that audiences really connect with truth of some sort, whether that be the truth of you, like you just said, it scares the hell out of me, ghosts scare the hell out of me, so I'm going to make Paranormal Activity. And there's that essence of truth from the filmmaker themselves or from the writer themselves, and that's what people connect to. Do you agree, or some sort of truth within the zeitgeist of the world? But truth is what we look for. Do you agree in that sense?
I completely agree, and I suppose it could be very, very easy to be cynical about how much truth there is in the Hollywood blockbuster, that $200-300 million movie.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But the ones that really work and
Mm-hmm.
that really I think step out of the pack, they do speak to they speak a truth and a truth that that just grabs you by the throat and you want to go back to it, and you can go to something. Yeah, we can talk about that scary dark truth, but Harry Potter is full of truth, and truths and that. I speak to a worldwide audience and particularly a young audience in a very profound way. Mm-hmm. And I think if you go back and read the first book, you understand that came from a very personal space. And
she was on welfare, sitting in the back of a car somewhere writing it.
Exactly, and it's that truth is within that story, and those aspirations of breaking out of that cycle of despair and poverty and all of that. And you know what, if you're gonna do this gig as screenwriters, you better have something to say. And people, you'll get, going back to the development part of it, you'll have people who will try to beat that truth out of it sometimes. And that's when you really have to put down your foot and say no. And that's what I was talking about, destroying the essence of it. You just really summed it up better than I did, Alex. It's that if they're destroying the truth of it. And I've always written, I didn't know I had a theme until I had enough work where I could say, oh, my work has a theme for the most part. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's about, families that have fallen apart who are brought back together in some very bizarre way. Mm-hmm. And that comes from a place within me, and it's something that when I start thinking story, it's sort of naturally where I go, and I feel sorry for young writers out there who are just trying to emulate the Dark Knight or whatever, whatever it is that they've watched it so many times that they think they can write that without having their own truth within them,
Well, that's the thing that I've said this many times on the show is that, when you try to emulate as a director or a screenwriter, like I'm going to be the next Quentin Tarantino, I'm like, we don't need another Quentin Tarantino. We've got a Quentin Tarantino, and I guarantee you Quentin does it much better than you'll ever do it.
Yeah.
And to be original.
Yeah, you're talking about James Cameron earlier, and my last development job was I was working for Walter Hill, and I was tasked with the job of finding a writer for the Alien sequel, which of course became Aliens. Mm-hmm. And I met Jim Cameron at my office. And that
was right after Terminator, so he was
and I don't even think, as I remember it, at least, I don't think Terminator had even been released yet, but I got a hold of the script, and this was not some brilliant call on my part, because if you read the script Terminator at that point and you couldn't see that this guy was going to become the Jim Cameron, you didn't deserve the job that I had. and he came and met me in my office, and at that time, this will put this back into the 80s, he was working on a movie called New Year's Eve 1999.
Oh my God.
And he brought in all this brilliant conceptual art and talked about it so passionately, and I'd read Terminator, and I went to Walter Hill and I said, okay, I found our writer. And of course Jim became the writer and director. And I went through a lot of development meetings at Fox in the room with Jim and some studio executives over there. And yeah, you talk about a guy who knew what he wanted to do and knew how he wanted to do it, and knew how to say no. And that was James Cameron. And I'm in terms of my development life, that's my proudest achievement was connecting James to the Alien sequel in the early stages.
And that's still arguably it's my favorite, I think, of the Alien movies. And it's just, I mean, and we could talk for hours just on James, but it's pretty remarkable that, I personally don't think he's made a bad movie in his career, other than maybe Piranha: The Spawning. But
so that's what I had to show people at the beginning.
There was no Terminator yet.
Because there was no, there was no Terminator. I had Piranha.
A Roger Corman.
This guy's a genius. This guy's the next big deal. Here, look at Piranha.
No. Piranha 2, The Spawning. Not even the original Piranha.
But again, if you read Terminator and you met him, oh boy, you had to know.
Right, exactly. So now I hear that you're giving workshops now on screenwriting. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of workshops you're giving?
Yeah, well, I've taught for over 25 years.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
I'm going to say something that's going to come off a bit snotty, maybe. Alex, forgive me.
No worries.
But maybe what separates me out from a lot of screenwriting teachers out there is that I'm still a working screenwriter, and that I've been in the trenches for all these years. And I've had experiences on both sides of the desk. I've been a studio executive. I've been a screenwriter dealing with studio executives. And I've done all my teaching, well, not all of my teaching by any means, but the majority of my teaching at UCLA Extension. And I taught a class at UCLA Extension a few semesters ago. And I just kind of realized that I wanted to step out of that curriculum and do it on my own. And so I have started, here's the website, everyone, Larry Wilson Screenwriting Workshop. And the first 2 workshops I'm going to do are horror and fantasy writing. They're called The Method to Madness. They're at Larry Wilson Screenwriting Workshop right now. They're going to happen in LA April 8th and 9th, I believe, and then another weekend in April. If you go on the website, you can check them out. And I definitely, my career has in terms of my work, has been primarily in the dark comedy, horror, fantasy world. And I'm going to do my first 2 weekend workshops on horror and fantasy writing. And then, but I'm also going to be consulting with I think because of just this sort of this life of experience I've had now, it's like very weird to wake up and you've been doing something for 30 years, and the fact that I've kind of done it in a lot of different ways. I just think I have a unique enough perspective and a fresh enough perspective to bring something to aspiring writers in terms of consultations or in terms of my workshops and all of that. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think I could. It's a matter of the truth again, because you don't get rich teaching at UCLA Extension. And there have been a lot of years I've taught there where I didn't even need the money wasn't an issue whatsoever. But I've just always loved teaching and I've loved exploring. Moving writers, and it's that when you find that writer in your classroom where you go, wow, this person can actually do this. That's just a brilliant moment. And so there's a truth to my teaching too, and a passion to really help people, get their script finished, for one thing. Oh my gosh. I know you know this, Alex. I mean,
yes, the screenwriter who's been working on a screenplay for 7 years, that guy?
Yeah, and the thing that I always say to people, and I make up the number in the beginning just to sort of what I think fits the room. I will sometimes say 98% of you are going to fail. And people go, but I say, but you'll fail because you'll never finish your script.
Right.
And that's a sad truth that I've confronted many, many times in my teaching career, I'm oh my God, please God shoot me if I say I'm a motivational screenwriting coach, but
I'll just call you Tony Robbins.
Yeah, I hope no, you won't. but I do. I because look, I went through a very severe case of writer's block. I had a like I say a door to walk through to become a studio executive and do that job for a few years to realize I wanted to write again. But I understand the fears of it, and for me it was I barely had a high school education, and I thought being a writer was you had to have, gone to college and get a degree. All this stuff is, of course, absolute nonsense. Mm-hmm. I think so. I think I'm going to be good for the writers who want to work with me in terms of that, just getting their script finished. Oh my gosh, finish already! and so the horror and fantasy workshops will be based on sort of a wealth of experience and a love for the genres and a passion for the genres. I can geek out on them, but also the practical side of it, and yes, a motivational side of it. Finish your script, kids.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Now, and I'll put all that information in the show notes for everybody listening, so you can go right there and get links to everything.
Awesome, thank you.
Now, what advice would you give a screenwriter just starting out, besides finish your script?
Yeah, besides which is like I've given away my workshop. I mean, that's
it.
That is the biggest one. But of course, the thing that has changed so dramatically since you were working in a video store and I was,
screenwriting BeetleJuice,
my screenwriting career is DIY.
Yeah,
and I know, and I love your site.
Oh, thank you.
And I love the resources that you bring to people, because it used to be very, very, very hard to get a movie made, if only because film stock was so expensive.
Just that alone, and the cameras.
Yeah, and yes, and the rentals and all of
the
that.
lights and the sure.
And if there's and now to state the obvious, that no longer is the case. And I am going to be doing a lot of DIY preaching within my workshops too, and particularly, I heard I'm going to forget the filmmaker's name now, but he's making really kind of balls to the wall, pretty good horror movies for like $5,000 that he's crowdfunding, and
right.
That story's out there in lots of different places now. And he said something that I thought was so smart. He said, I think that for the budgets I work on and the limitations I work on, you can do a good drama, right? You can do a good drama, or you can do a good horror movie.
You absolutely can. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so there's no excuse left. If you really want to do this and you really want to make something, there's no excuse left. You could do it for $5,000. I know you had I forget. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name right now. You had a conversation on your podcast. Just maybe it's the most recent one with someone who made a movie for $500.
Yeah, I had a couple of them for $500. I had Josh Caldwell who did his feature film for $6,000, which was All at Night in L.A. There's absolutely no excuse. And I just did my movie, This Is Meg, for a humble budget, under $25 million. As soon as my audit's done, I'll release the budget. But
under $25 million right now.
Under $25 million for sure. But there's no excuse. And my audience is, I've heard, they're exhausted of me telling them this. But I'm glad that someone like you of your caliber is saying the exact same thing. And as a screenwriter, I think, do you agree that at this point in the game, as a screenwriter, a young screenwriter starting out, instead of trying to, you could obviously submit, you could obviously try to get into the studio system, but that is a much more competitive world than writing your own stuff, teaming up with a director or production, to do a small $5,000 movie, or do it yourself. Literally just go out and shoot it yourself and find people that can support you, especially if you live in LA, for God's sakes. But you can do it anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world for that matter. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with it, and these workshops, the LA workshops, sign up now, kids, because they may be the last ones I do in the U.S. For a while, because I'm my lovely new wife of about 8 months now.
Congratulations!
Family, we're moving to the Netherlands over the summer.
Are you? That's awesome.
Yeah, we're moving to Amsterdam or Rotterdam, and
for good or just for the summer?
Well, for who knows? We'll see what life brings. But it feels like it's going to be for good, whatever for good means.
Right.
But I'm hoping to be speaking to an international audience very soon, and you can do it anywhere in the world. And I sort of too think that that maybe as a young writer you can have a two-prong approach. Have that project that's your big studio movie, and write that spec script that is the one that you hope you'll sell. That $1 million sale.
Mm-hmm. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
And can be that big budget movie, but never let go of this really compelling fact that if that isn't happening or that script gets stuck somewhere, that you can turn around and you can do a movie. You can borrow the money from your parents if you're. I mean,
it's fine. $1,000, $2,000, $5,000. Right.
But. And it's, oh my God, the sense of liberation and relief in that is so huge. Because I've going there myself, and starting to do some DIY work because I get very bored by how long it takes to get something through the studio. And I'm writing screenplays, and there is no more useless document than a screenplay that's unproduced. Doorstop, right?
Right.
So it's something that I'm exploring for myself at this point, and it's just a great sense of freedom and liberation and fun.
I mean, I'll tell you, when I just finished my first feature with that same spirit, and it is the most fun production I've ever been on, and I've done a ton of stuff in my career as a director, but it was so freeing. I answered to no one. For better or worse, people like it or don't like it, it's on me. And it's wonderful though. It was the most freeing creative experience of my life, and now I'm addicted to it.
Yeah. Yeah, Alex, I hear you, and me too. And it's my workshop students are going to get an earful about DIY, because I just think it's a brand new era of filmmaking, and it's probably the best thing that's happened to movies in decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm going to ask you 3 questions I ask all of my guests.
Yes.
What is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
Not to get my feelings hurt.
Okay. Good answer.
Yeah, because if you're a writer, if you're an artist, you have a certain amount of sensitivity, and working DIY or working in Hollywood is not for the faint of heart or the thin-skinned. And I had to develop a thicker skin and not get my feelings hurt and not realize it's all personal. I did a Screen Junkies interview recently.
I love, by the way, love Screen Junkies. Absolutely love what they do.
It's pretty cool, and it's a very short story, I promise. Mm-hmm. And it was about the Addams Family, and Spencer, the host, asked, because there were Twitter questions coming in. Well, it had Addams Family Values, the sequel. What do you think of it? And I said to Spencer, honestly, I never saw it.
Oh, really?
That's awesome. I wasn't asked back. I mean, for a lot of reasons, but I mean, that's thin skin, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, and so not getting my feelings hurt. That's the answer to that question, and realizing that that these things are very seldom personal notes or rebellions on the set and all of that. They can be personal, I guess, but I just and at this point I'm kind of able to laugh about it after a certain point.
That does take time to build up that skin.
Yeah.
It does. It's taken me a few years. So what are 3 of your favorite films of all time?
Can I start with like my favorite film of all times, my absolute favorite film, and that is animated in some way, animated in the sense of brought life to all of my work, and it's The Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh, such a great movie!
Oh my God, it's the 1936 sequel to Frankenstein. It is I had the great joy of seeing it on a big screen a couple of years ago. If you haven't seen it, it is both a dark fairy tale, a Christ parable, a horror movie, over the top melodrama, and that film I love and just remain absolutely passionate about. A film that so that's probably number one on my list. I think that Silence of the Lambs had a huge impact on me.
Such an amazing movie.
Yeah, and I was in my last days as a script reader, which I was for many years. I was also a story analyst, a union story analyst. I worked at every studio in town, and one of my last days as a story analyst, I read the galleys to the book Silence of the Lambs. And it was I actually wrote in the comments of my coverage, I said, if done right, this can win an Academy Award. And I'm very
you called it.
Yeah, I called it, and I just think it's the most extraordinary is it a thriller? Is it a horror movie? Is it a police procedural? Or is it a philosophical statement? I think it's all of those things.
Yeah.
That's so Bride of Frankenstein, Silence of the Lambs. And I want to think of something recently that I saw that just really, because I could go on.
Sure.
Tangents about foreign films, indie films, studio films, blah, 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 blah. But I think just to bring it back to horror, the movie that really just in the last few years just really just I fell in love with was Babadook.
I haven't heard that one.
Oh, it's an Australian horror movie made, written and directed for a very low budget by, and I'm going to forget her name now, a woman writer director in Australia, and it is a incredibly compelling dark horror movie about a mother and a son, and written from such a personal space. And again, I don't know the woman's history, but there's so much truth within that movie. So I'll just stop there for now.
Okay, that's 3. That's a good 3. That's a good 3.
Yeah.
Now, where can people find you online?
Larry Wilson Screenwriting Workshop. Please go there, check it out, and I hope to meet you in my seminars. And then Draw a Door is my Twitter feed, and I'm climbing back on Twitter today. The website for the workshop has just gone up in a new incarnation. I'm going back on Twitter today. I'd love to hear from anyone. And Larry Wilson Writing Workshop, go there and
.com.
Yeah, .com, excuse me. Yeah.
Sure.
And Draw a Door on Twitter, and I will be there, and I'd love to meet everyone,
Larry, man, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Alex. It's been great. Thank you.
I told you that Larry would be dropping some major knowledge bombs on this episode, and I had a ball talking to Larry. He's just awesome. It's awesome to talk to someone of his caliber, who's written some iconic movies in Hollywood, working within the Hollywood system, and still giving back with his workshops and trying to teach the next generation. So if you guys are in the LA area, head over to the show notes of this episode, which are indiefilmhustle.com/148, and I'll have a link to all of the workshops. I think he's going to be doing 2 in April. If I were you guys, I would definitely check them out if you are interested in screenwriting, especially if you're interested in screenwriting within the genre of supernatural and horror. He's definitely a master without question. Don't forget to head over to freefilmbook.com. That's freefilmbook.com to download your free filmmaking audiobook and screenwriting audiobooks from Audible. And guys, if you like the show and you really find some value in it, please share it. Tell a friend. Just drop an email, forward it, like it, share it with everybody you know, because it really helps to get the word out on what we're doing here at Indie Film Hustle. So I really do truly appreciate it. And guys, I do have a lot of cool stuff coming up for you in the future. Meg hopefully will be released in the summer for all of you Meg heads. I just made that up, Meg heads. For all the tribe members who are interested in watching the final product of that insane journey that I went on with This Is Meg, and still on, by the way. So it should be a lot of fun. Thank you guys all so much for the support, and I'm so glad that many of you are finding value in what I do here in my mumblings on the Indie Film Hustle podcast and what we're doing at indiefilmhustle.com. So thanks again, as always, and keep that hustle going. Keep that dream alive, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.